The badge caught the light like a star drowning. Neddy knelt at the riverbank, her hands already numb from washing hides in the cold October water, when she saw it lodged between two stones, silver tarnished black at the edges, with a single word stamped across its face, Sheriff. She plucked it from the water and held it up, droplets falling from the metal like tears. For a long moment she just stared. Then slowly, deliberately, she smiled. Not the kind of smile that carried warmth, the kind that came before fire. She slipped the badge into the leather pouch at her waist and stood, her buckskin dress dripping, her braided hair heavy against her back. Around her, the canyon walls rose silent and red, carved by centuries of wind and water. This was her place now, the place the white men had left her after they took everything else. Neddy had lived alone for 3 years in the canyon, surviving on what the land gave and what she could trap. The nearest settlement was 15 miles south, a town called Redemption, where men drank too much and talked too loud and pretended the blood on their hands had washed away with time. She knew that town. She knew its sheriff, or at least she had. The badge was still wet when she tucked it deeper into her pouch, feeling its weight settle against her hip like a promise. She gathered the hides she'd been washing and slung them over her shoulder, then started the walk back to her small camp nestled in the canyon's shadow. As she walked, her mind drifted to a night 7 years ago, the night Redemption burned her village. She'd been 16, crouched in the tall grass with her younger brother while the soldiers fired into lodges and dragged screaming women into the dirt. Her brother had tried to run back for their mother. A man in a silver badge had shot him in the back. Neddy had memorized that face, the square jaw, the pale eyes, the way he'd holstered his gun without even checking if the boy was dead. Sheriff Clayton Howell. She'd spent years imagining his death, slow, painful, satisfying. But after a while the anger had turned to ash, and she'd let it go. Survival mattered more than revenge. Ghosts didn't fill your belly or keep you warm. But now, holding his badge in her hand, the ash reignited. Because if the badge was in the river, that meant Clayton Howell had lost it, or dropped it, or died. And Neddy wanted to know which. She reached her camp as the sun dipped behind the canyon ridge, casting long shadows across her fire pit. She hung the hides to dry and sat cross-legged on a woven mat, pulling the badge from her pouch. She turned it over in her hands, studying the scratches, the dents, the places where the metal had worn thin. Then she dug a shallow hole beside her fire pit, placed the badge inside and covered it with dirt. Still smiling, Matt ##. Neddy woke before dawn, the dream still clinging to her like smoke. In it her brother had been alive, laughing as they raced along the riverbank. Then he'd turned to her, blood spreading across his chest, and asked, "Why didn't you bury me?" She hadn't. None of them had been buried. The soldiers left the bodies where they fell. She sat up, breathing hard, and looked at the small mound of dirt where she'd buried the badge. It felt wrong now, too easy, too quick. Burying it had been an act of satisfaction, a ritual of closure, but closure wasn't the same as justice, and her brother deserved justice. She spent the morning hunting, her mind restless. By midday she'd caught 2 rabbits and made a decision. She would go to Redemption, not for revenge. She told herself that carefully, but for answers. If Howell was dead, she wanted to see his grave. If he was alive, she wanted to see his face when he realized who she was. The town hadn't changed much in 7 years. It sprawled along the valley floor like something half dead and stubborn, wooden buildings bleached gray by the sun, streets churned to mud by horses and rain. Neddy tied her mare to a post outside the general store and pulled her shawl over her head, hiding her face. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco and flour. A white woman stood behind the counter, tired-eyed and wary. She looked at Neddy the way people always did, like she was something dangerous that had wandered in from the wild. "Help you?" the woman asked. "I'm looking for Sheriff Howell," Neddy said, keeping her voice flat. The woman's expression shifted, something between pity and fear. "He's dead." Neddy's chest tightened, but she kept her face still. "How?" "Drowned. 3 weeks ago. Fell off his horse crossing the river during a storm. They found his body 2 days later, washed up near the canyon." Neddy nodded slowly, her mind racing. So the badge had come from his body. The river had stripped it away like it was nothing. "Where's he buried?" she asked. The woman pointed west. "Cemetery on the hill. Can't miss it." Neddy left without buying anything. She walked to the cemetery, a plot of dry grass and crooked crosses overlooking the town. Howell's grave was near the front, marked by a wooden headstone with his name burned into the wood. Clayton Howell, Sheriff, Hoa Fader, Father. The word hero made her stomach turn. She stood there for a long time staring at the grave, waiting to feel something: relief, satisfaction, peace. But all she felt was hollow. A voice behind her made her turn. "You knew him." A man stood a few feet away, older, gray-haired, wearing a deputy's badge. His face was kind but cautious. "No," Neddy said. The deputy studied her, then nodded. "Didn't think so. Not many folks come out here for him anymore. He wasn't well liked toward the end." "Why not?" The man hesitated. "Made mistakes, bad ones, got people killed." He paused, then added quietly, "Got a lot of Indians killed, back during the campaigns. Some folks thought he was a hero for it. Others knew better." Neddy's hands curled into fists inside her shawl. "And you? I think a man's actions follow him even into the grave." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Neddy alone with the dead. She knelt beside the grave, her fingers brushing the dry earth. Part of her wanted to spit on it, part of her wanted to dig him up and bury him deeper. Instead she whispered, "You don't deserve to rest." Then she stood and walked back toward the canyon, the hollow feeling growing with every step. Matt #. Neddy was halfway back to the canyon when she heard the horses, 3 riders, coming fast from the direction of town. She didn't run. Running made you pray. Instead she kept walking, her hand drifting to the knife at her belt. They caught up to her within minutes, circling her like wolves. 2 of them were young, eager, the kind of men who wore their cruelty like a badge. The third was older, his face scarred and mean. "You're the squaw from the store," the older one said. It wasn't a question. Neddy didn't answer. "What were you doing at Howell's grave?" "Paying respects." The man laughed sharp and ugly. "Respects? That's rich. You know what I think? I think you're one of them Comanche that got away when we cleaned out your camp. I think you came back looking for trouble." "I'm not looking for anything." "Too bad. Trouble found you anyway." He dismounted, and the others followed. Neddy's pulse quickened, but she kept her face calm. She'd survived worse than this. "Howell drowned," the man said, stepping closer. "But before he died he told me something. Said he saw a Comanche woman near the river a few days before he fell. Said she was watching him." "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Neddy's mind raced. Howell hadn't seen her. She'd been nowhere near the river when he died. This man was lying, testing her, looking for an excuse. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The man smiled. "I think you do. I think you pushed him in." "I didn't." "Prove it." One of the younger men grabbed her arm, yanking her forward. Neddy twisted, her knife flashing out and slashed across his wrist. He screamed and stumbled back, blood dripping into the dirt. The older man pulled his gun. "You just made a big mistake, squaw." Neddy ran. She bolted toward the rocks, her legs pumping, the canyon rising ahead like salvation. Gunshots cracked behind her, bullets whining past her head. She ducked behind a boulder and kept moving, weaving through the maze of stone and scrub. They followed, shouting, their horses struggling on the uneven ground. Neddy knew this terrain like her own heartbeat. Every crack, every shadow, every hidden path. She led them deeper, away from her camp, toward the narrow gorge where the walls pressed close, and the footing turned treacherous. One of the horses stumbled, throwing its rider. The man cursed, limping, and the others slowed. "Let her go," one of them shouted. "She's not worth it." But the older man didn't stop. He dismounted and came after her on foot, gun raised, his face twisted with rage. Neddy reached the gorge's edge and turned, her back to the drop. Below, the river roared, swollen and dark. The man stopped 10 feet away, breathing hard. Nowhere left to run. Neddy looked at the river, then back at him. She thought of her brother, of Howell's grave, of the badge she'd buried with a smile. I didn't kill him, she said quietly, but I'm glad he's dead. The man's finger tightened on the trigger, and Neddy jumped. Net hash hash. The water hit her like a fist, cold and violent, dragging her under. Neddy kicked hard, fighting the current, her lungs screaming. The river spun her, slammed her against rocks, pulled her down into darkness. Then hands grabbed her. She surfaced, gasping, and found herself caught in someone's grip, strong, steady, pulling her toward the bank. She thrashed, thinking it was one of the men, but the voice that spoke was different. Stop fighting or you'll drown us both. A woman's voice. Neddy went limp, letting herself be dragged onto the muddy shore. She collapsed, coughing water, her body shaking. When she finally looked up, she saw her rescuer, a white woman maybe 30, with sun-dark skin and calloused hands. She wore men's clothes, trousers, a worn shirt, boots caked in mud. You're lucky I was checking my traps, the woman said, wringing out her shirt. Another minute, and the river would have kept you. Neddy sat up slowly, still catching her breath. Who are you? Name's Ruth. I live upstream, and you? Neddy. Ruth studied her, then nodded. You running from someone? 3 men. One of them tried to kill me. Ruth's jaw tightened. Let me guess, friends of the late sheriff. Neddy blinked. You knew him. Everyone knew him, and most of us are better off with him gone. Ruth stood and offered her hand. Come on, my cabin's not far. You can dry off and tell me what happened. Neddy hesitated, then took her hand. Ruth's cabin was small but sturdy, built into the hillside with a view of the river. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and herbs. Ruth started a fire, and handed Neddy a blanket, then poured 2 cups of something hot and bitter. Drink, she said, it'll help. Neddy drank, the warmth spreading through her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally Ruth said, you went to his grave, didn't you? Neddy looked up, startled. How did you know? Because I did the same thing, 3 weeks ago, the day they buried him. Ruth's face was hard, distant. He killed my husband, shot him during a land dispute 5 years ago, said it was self-defense. It wasn't. Neddy's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Ruth shook her head. Don't be. I'm not. She paused, then added quietly, I found his badge in the river the day after he drowned. I was going to keep it, proof that he was really gone, but then I thought, what's the point? Keeping it just keeps him alive. So what did you do with it? Ruth smiled, sad, tired, but real. I threw it back. Neddy thought of the badge she'd buried, still hidden in the dirt by her fire pit. She'd thought burying it would bring closure, but maybe Ruth was right. Maybe the only way to let go was to stop holding on. He killed my brother, Neddy said quietly. 7 years ago, I watched it happen. Ruth reached across the table and placed her hand over Neddy's. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They sat like that until the fire burned low, 2 women bound by grief and survival, sharing a silence that felt like forgiveness. Neddy stayed with Ruth for 2 days, letting her body heal and her mind settle. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find Ruth already dressed, a pack slung over her shoulder. I'm heading into town, Ruth said. Got business with the new deputy. You want to come? Neddy hesitated, then nodded. They rode together, side by side, the canyon unfolding around them like a story being rewritten. When they reached Redemption, Ruth led Neddy straight to the deputy's office. The gray-haired deputy from the cemetery looked up as they entered, his expression wary but not unkind. Ruth, he said, then glanced at Neddy. And you, the woman from the grave. Her name's Neddy, Ruth said firmly, and she's got something to report. 3 men tried to kill her 2 days ago. One of them accused her of murdering Sheriff Howell. The deputy's face darkened. Which men? Ruth gave him the names. The deputy wrote them down, his jaw tight. I'll handle it, he said. Then to Neddy, I'm sorry, Howell left a lot of poison behind. Some folks are still drinking it. Neddy nodded. What will you do? Arrest them. Make sure they answer for what they did. He paused. And for the record, Howell drowned because he was drunk and reckless. No one pushed him. The river just took what was coming. It wasn't justice. not the kind Nettie had imagined, but it was something. As they left the office, Ruth turned to her. "What will you do now?" Nettie thought about the canyon, the loneliness, the endless survival. Then she thought about Ruth's hand on hers, the warmth of the fire, the quiet understanding. "I don't know," she said, honestly. Ruth smiled. "Then stay with me, at least for a while. The cabin's big enough for two." Nettie looked at her, this stranger who'd pulled her from the river, who'd shared her grief, who'd offered her something no one had in years, a choice. "All right," Nettie said. For a while, they rode back to the canyon together, the sun high and bright, the land stretching wide and open. When they reached Ruth's cabin, Nettie unsaddled her mare and carried her pack inside. That night, she returned to her old camp one last time. She dug up the badge, held it in her hands, and felt its weight, not of metal, but of memory. Then she walked to the river's edge and threw it in. The badge sank quickly, swallowed by the current, disappearing into the dark water. Nettie watched it go, and this time, when she smiled, it wasn't the smile of before. It was lighter, freer. She turned and walked back toward Ruth's cabin, toward the firelight glowing warm in the window, toward a future she hadn't planned, but was ready to meet. Behind her, the river flowed on, carrying the past downstream, wearing it smooth, letting it go. Years later, when people asked Nettie why she'd left the canyon, she would tell them the truth. "I found something in the river, and when I let it go, I found myself." Ruth would laugh and add, "She's being poetic. What she means is she finally stopped running." And Nettie would smile, warm this time, whole, and say, "Same thing." The two women built a life together in the canyon, trapping and trading, surviving and thriving. They never spoke of Sheriff Howell again. His name faded like old smoke, and his grave grew over with weeds. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Nettie would walk to the river and stand at its edge, listening to the water rush past. She'd think of her brother, of the badge, of the man who'd taken so much and died with so little, and she'd whisper to the current, "You're free now, we both are." Then she'd turn and walk back to the cabin, where Ruth waited with coffee and warmth, and a life worth living. The badge stayed buried in the river, along with everything it represented: violence, grief, the weight of the past. And Nettie, the lonely Comanche woman who'd smiled when she buried it, never looked back. Nettie silhouetted against the canyon at dusk, the river winding silver below, her hand reaching back toward Ruth, standing in the doorway. Two survivors, two souls, choosing each other in a land that had tried to bury them both.